3 American F-15s were just shot down over Kuwait, and the part that should stop you cold is not that an enemy did it. It is that the aircraft appear to have been brought down by the air defenses of a U.S. partner in the middle of a live regional war. Read that again. Not one jet, 3. Not in a training accident, not in peacetime confusion. In active combat, in one of the most militarized regions on Earth, during the kind of air defense environment where one wrong identification can turn allies into targets. And before we go any further, here is the most important line in this entire story. The incident is still under investigation. That matters. Because if you want to understand what this moment really means, you have to separate what is confirmed from what people online are already trying to turn into mythology. What's confirmed is dramatic enough. 3 American F-15E Strike Eagles went down over Kuwait in what U.S. Central Command described as an apparent friendly fire incident. All 6 aircrew ejected. All 6 were recovered alive and were reported in stable condition. That is the confirmed core. Everything else has to be built around that carefully, not recklessly. But even if you stay that disciplined, this story is enormous, because 3 American strike fighters do not simply fall out of the sky by accident in a combat zone unless something deeper is breaking down. Friendly fire at this scale is not just a battlefield mishap. It is a stress signal. It tells you the system is under pressure. Identification cycles are compressed. Radar pictures are cluttered. Operators are working in seconds, not minutes. Multiple threats may be coming from different altitudes, speeds, and directions at the same time. In that kind of environment, the line between protection and catastrophe gets very thin, very fast. That is what makes this incident more than an aviation story. It is a story about how wars widen, how allied systems get overloaded, and how the fog of war stops being a metaphor and becomes an actual operational problem. When people hear friendly fire, they sometimes imagine pure incompetence. Sometimes it is incompetence, but often it is something more dangerous, a system being pushed beyond clean decision-making. Radar tracks multiply, drones, missiles, military jets, civilian traffic disruptions, emergency launches, intercept windows, false positives, degraded communications, split-second rules of engagement. You do not need Hollywood chaos. You just need too many hard decisions arriving too quickly. And that is exactly why this matters far beyond Kuwait. If a close American partner can apparently mistake 3 US F-15Es for hostile aircraft during an active regional conflict, then this is not just about one awful night. It is about what happens when a conflict stops being a contained operation and starts turning the whole region into one giant compressed threat environment. Think about the symbolism here. The F-15E is not a light patrol aircraft. It is a 2-seat strike fighter built for serious combat. It carries major firepower. It is flown by trained crews operating in coordinated military networks. When aircraft like that are lost, not to enemy fighters, not to mechanical failure publicly identified so far, but apparently to Allied air defenses, the message is brutal. This theater is becoming so chaotic that even friends are struggling to distinguish friend from foe in real time. And this happened against the backdrop of a conflict that was already widening across multiple fronts. CNN reported that by Monday, 6 U.S. service members had been killed in action and 18 more had been seriously wounded. Iran had launched missiles and drones against targets in Israel and several Gulf countries hosting U.S. bases, including Bahrain, the UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. CNN teams in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and Doha reported hearing explosions and seeing apparent interceptions in the sky. This is where the story becomes bigger than the headline. Because the real question is not only, how did 3 American aircraft get shot down by a partner's defenses? The deeper question is, what kind of battlefield produces that outcome? And the answer is a battlefield where the defense side may be forced to assume the worst continuously, where waiting too long to fire can be fatal, but firing too quickly can be disastrous, where commanders are trying to defend cities, bases, embassies, oil sites, airports, and civilians all at once, where the cost of hesitation feels unbearable, and the cost of error arrives one missile launch later. That is the paradox of air defense under saturation pressure. The system exists to keep people safe, but under enough pressure, the same system can become dangerous to the people it is meant to protect. Not because protection is the wrong idea, because identification under pressure is one of the hardest military problems on Earth. Radar returns do not come with moral clarity attached. Operators see tracks, speeds, altitudes, directions, transponder signals if they are available, and a narrowing window to act. If hostile drones and missiles are already in the battle space, nobody gets the luxury of calm. And there is another reason this incident matters. It hits the credibility of alliance warfare at exactly the wrong time. Modern coalition operations depend on trust. Trust in shared operating pictures, trust in deconfliction procedures, trust that Allied defenses can recognize Allied aircraft, trust that if your planes enter a contested environment, the people defending that environment know you're there and know not to shoot. Once an incident like this happens, The trust does not disappear overnight, but it does get damaged. Pilots think differently. Commanders think differently. Politicians think differently. Every next sortie carries a little more psychological weight. That matters because wars are not fought only with missiles and aircraft. They are fought with confidence. Confidence that your systems work. Confidence that your partners can integrate under pressure. Confidence that your forces are not facing danger from every direction, including the wrong one. Once that confidence is shaken, every future operation becomes more complicated. You need new procedures, more caution, tighter identification rules, more communication checks, more hesitation. And in war, even small increases in hesitation can matter. There is also the public dimension. To a general audience, this sounds almost impossible. How do you shoot down your partner's jets? But military history says it happens more often than people want to believe, especially in fast-moving campaigns. The more intense the threat environment, the higher the risk. That does not make it normal. It makes it tragically recognizable. The battlefield punishes confusion instantly. And confusion grows fastest when a war expands faster than the systems around it can adapt. Now step back and look at the strategic timing. This incident landed at a moment when the regional war was already colliding with energy markets, civilian travel, and global nerves. CNN reported Brent crude rose nearly 9% to around $79 a barrel. WTI rose about 8% to around $73. And Dutch natural gas surged almost 48% after Qatar's state energy company stopped LNG production at Rosslafen following an Iranian attack on the facility. Even before direct policy consequences, the market was already broadcasting the same message the battlefield was broadcasting. This crisis is widening, and the shockwaves are not staying local. That is why the shoot-down matters even to people who do not follow military aviation. Because once a war starts disrupting alliance confidence and energy stability at the same time, it stops being over there in any comfortable sense. It becomes a system story. Insurance costs move. Shipping risk gets repriced. Travel hubs shut down or slow down. Governments start recalculating. Investors stop assuming the situation is temporary. Ordinary families do not need to know what an F-15E is to feel the downstream effects of a region operating under panic conditions. And this is where content about war often goes wrong. It rushes straight into chest thumping or conspiracy. That is exactly the wrong way to understand a story like this. The smarter reading is colder, more mechanical, more uncomfortable. In a regional conflict where missiles, drones, fighter aircraft, air defense batteries, civilian infrastructure, and allied militaries are all interacting inside shrinking decision windows, the risk of catastrophic misidentification rises. Not because one side is uniquely foolish, because the system itself becomes harder to manage as the tempo rises. You can think of it like this. In a stable environment, identification is layered. There is time to confirm, time to cross-check, time to verify routes, signatures, timing, mission corridors, and friendly coordination. In a crisis, that time collapses. A radar operator may be looking at multiple fast-moving tracks while under pressure to protect critical sites from attack. If hostile activity is already underway, the threshold for action can shift. Once that happens, the room for error shrinks to almost nothing. And that is why the phrase apparent friendly fire incident is so important. It is careful language, and careful language matters in war. It tells you there is enough evidence to say this was likely fratricide, but not enough to treat every detail as closed. That is the responsible frame, because the internet rewards certainty, especially in war. But certainty is often how you get the story wrong. What is known is already serious enough. 3 F-15Es down, 6 crew out alive, Kuwait acknowledging the incident, and an investigation underway. There's a second layer to this that should worry policymakers. The Gulf states have spent years building an image of security, order, and control. Airports, finance, tourism, energy, logistics, expatriate life, all of it rests on the belief that these are highly managed environments. A major friendly fire incident involving American aircraft cuts directly against that image. It says the region is no longer operating under peacetime assumptions. It says the airspace is now contested not just by enemies, but by fear itself. And fear changes behavior. Pilots may alter routes. Civil authorities may tighten restrictions. Airlines may suspend more operations. Investors may assume the conflict is moving from temporary shock to durable instability. Governments may harden positions publicly while privately asking much harder questions. How secure are our sites really? How integrated are our systems really? How much more pressure can the air defense network handle if attacks continue? What other mistakes become possible if this pace holds? Those are not abstract questions. CNN reported widespread travel disruption, with major regional hubs like Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and Doha affected by airspace closures and airline suspensions. The U.S. also urged its citizens to depart countries throughout the Middle East due to serious safety risks, even as commercial options were constrained. When military confusion and civilian disruption begin happening at the same time, the sense of normal order starts to crack. Now, one reason this story is likely to stick in public memory is visual. CNN reported geolocated video showing a fighter jet crashing and a pilot parachuting down. That image matters, because it turns a military report into something emotionally legible. This is no longer just a press release. It is an image of advanced aircraft falling from the sky over Allied territory while pilots eject to survive. The distance between coalition operation and regional chaos suddenly looks much smaller. But there is also a narrower military lesson here, and it is one professionals will be studying immediately. Deconfliction is not just paperwork, it is survival. Shared awareness is not a luxury, it is survival. Identification discipline is not bureaucratic overhead, it is survival. A coalition can have powerful weapons, sophisticated aircraft, and strong political alignment, but if the tempo of conflict outruns its coordination, those advantages start leaking away. That is why this story should not be framed as humiliation bait. The smarter frame is warning. A warning about escalation speed, a warning about saturation, a warning about the gap between military capability on paper and battlefield clarity in real life. It is entirely possible to have elite aircraft, advanced defenses, and close partnerships, and still end up with tragedy when the environment becomes too crowded, too fast. And that takes us to the human dimension, which should not get lost. 6 aircrew had to eject from 3 separate aircraft in a live combat environment and were recovered alive. That is the most fortunate part of this story, because the same headline could have ended much darker. 3 lost aircraft is already severe. Losing 6 aircrew as well would have transformed this into an even deeper military and political crisis. The fact that all 6 were recovered in stable condition does not erase the significance of the incident, but it does remind you how close war always sits to a much worse version of itself. So what does this incident ultimately mean? It means the war is not only expanding geographically, it is becoming harder to control mechanically. It means Allied systems are operating under enough stress that the margin for error is narrowing. It means the coalition side is now paying a price not only in enemy attacks, but in the confusion generated by the battle space itself. And it means every government involved now has to ask a brutal question. If this is what the air picture looks like at this stage, what happens if the conflict lasts longer, spreads wider, or intensifies further? That is the part people should focus on. Not the cheap version of the story, not the loudest version, the real version. 3 American F-15Es went down over Kuwait in an apparent friendly fire incident. All 6 aircrew survived. The event is under investigation, but even before that investigation is complete, the strategic message is already visible. The region's defenses are under strain. Alliance coordination is under strain. Civilian confidence is under strain. Markets are under strain. And once all of those strains begin feeding each other, every additional day of conflict becomes harder to manage than the day before. That is why this story matters. Not because it proves some cartoon version of collapse, because it reveals how modern wars actually become more dangerous. Not all at once, not only through spectacular enemy victories, but through accumulation, through overload, through misidentification, through widened fronts, through the moment when the systems built to impose order start showing signs that they, too, are being bent by the speed of events. Shot down not by the declared enemy, but apparently by the defenses of an ally. 6 aircrew alive, investigation ongoing. And one very clear signal to the world. This war is no longer just about who can strike hardest. It is about who can still keep control when the entire region is moving too fast for comfort.